Okay, so I have found myself being really critical of my appearance the last few days, and obviously I'm not like exceptionally attractive or whatever it may be, but there's really nothing I can do about it, right? But what I'm gonna do today is I'm gonna force myself to look at myself in this camera, and I'm gonna read my essay on Sylvia Plath's exploration of the female psyche, which the essay may not make me feel better, but it may help me understand myself a little more. Because I wrote this in March or April, I'm not sure. But it's been a while since I wrote this, and I might need to revisit it. I might need to revisit my own essay. So that's what. I found myself getting shy again. So that's the other thing. Like, I really need to talk to somebody, in the sense that I just need to openly talk to something or the other, right? And if it's a camera, I don't care. It's fine. It's allowed to be a camera. So, this is my essay. It's for my A levels, but it's not part of a component. It's just there, right? Now, the female psyche is a difficult thing to portray, yet no one has done it as masterfully as Sylvia Plath. The poems Morning Song and Sheep and Fog cover some of its most integral parts. The former speaks of the changing feelings postpartum, while Sheep and Fog covers disillusionment and melancholic detachment. What makes Plath's works so powerful is her use of poetic techniques to add to the complexity of the respective speakers' minds. Now, I'll say speakers a lot, but in my humble opinion, I believe these works especially are very indicative of Plath's own, mental state. Especially, these were very difficult periods of her life, and I think the entire collection, Ariel, covers the very difficult period of her life. And I feel like when it comes to at least the poetry from this collection, but I would believe all of Plath's poetry, you can't just read the poem itself. But honestly, even reading the poem itself gives you a really good snapshot into that point of time in her life. Like when you read the applicant, you can say, okay, this is some time where she may have found slight respite from her own struggles. Because at least that talks about society on a whole, right? But these are very very personal. So despite me saying speakers, because this is again to prepare for my Cambridge examinations, I do believe that these really need to be viewed subjectively, especially Morning Song and Sheep and Fog, man. They're as personal as a poem can get. Anyway, body paragraph 1. Morning Song commences with the detached melancholic tone. What did I just say? Sorry, no. Morning Song commences with a detached, mechanical tone, as that of someone objectively observing the birth of a child. It is cold and primitive, comparing the baby to a statue, and its cry as bald. True. However, in the second half, the poem implies that the speaker is hyper aware of what is happening around her, providing a stark contrast to the distant tone of the first. The imagery and tone regarding the child softens, displaying the changing feelings of the mother. The imagery still carries melancholy, such as when the window square whitens and swallows its dull stars. The dull stars imply the fading dreams of the speaker, and the window whitening and swallowing them shows how the birth of the child snuffs them out. This is one of the final lines, reflecting how the speaker's mind is still unstable. Overall, the poem is ambivalent in its portrayal of multiple aspects of new motherhood. Now, Sheep and Fog carries the detachment reflected in Morning Song, but it is outweighed by overwhelming, inescapable sadness. All the things in the poem are described as far, distancing them from the speaker and conveying the disassociation of the speaker. Why am I stuttering? Why was I so dramatic for a second? Now I'm stuttering. Okay, there are very few colors other than black, white, and grey. The only other color, red, is described as the color of rust, implying aging and stagnance. In its tone, the poem is the epitome of bleakness. It is the internal monologue of a woman on the verge of death, defeated. Nothing makes this more obvious than its fragmentation, like that of a person's disjointed train of thought. The reader is shown the female speaker's psyche in a multitude of ways, Plath uses imagery of a delicate flower to describe the isolation. However, the themes of the poem are scattered over multiple different lines, displaying how they are not separate in the speaker's mind. By utilizing the setting of the lonely countryside and the color palette of muted grays, the poetic technique of fragmentation, Plath masterfully distills the female experience of disassociation and deep depression into one poem. Now, detachment is a shield to protect the speakers of the two poems from their own vulnerability. In Morning Song, the readers observe as the speaker, a new mother, slowly lowers the shield and begins to feel a softness in regards to her child. However, this is the opposite of what is depicted in Sheep and Fog. The latter, as stated earlier, tells the story of a speaker far too disassociated to see anything other than darkness. Now, before we get to the conclusion, I would just like to say, I feel like so Morning Song was penned after Sylvia Plath had her first daughter, right? Had her first child, and that it's a very real depiction of what a young mother, but particularly someone as sensitive as Plath, may feel during that time, and especially someone who really struggled with depression at that time, throughout her life actually, right? Now, sheep and fog is something that's very familiar to, I think, a lot of us, right? Which, in the sense that the disassociation that she feels is unrelenting. And in that, like, it's so hopeless. The whole poem carries just this, you know, what do you call it? This veil of hopelessness. And you can't help but feel it weighing you down when you read the poem itself. So, you really have to notice what point in her life these were penned. And the thing is also that the I feel the kind of, now I can't really articulate this in terms of poetic techniques and whatnot right now, at least, but the sinking feeling that you get from Sheep and Fog is very similar to this sinking feeling you get from actual depression. I mean, it's not completely the same. You won't get debilitated by reading the poem once, but what I'm saying is what you do feel when she's describing this landscape is very similar to the heavy isolation one feels when they're going through a depressive episode, you know. But what you see here is like complete hopelessness, which is absolutely heartbreaking, especially knowing how she passed, and everything that did happen to her in her life. So anyway, getting to the conclusion of my essay. At face value, detachment and disassociation seem the same. What sets them apart is that detachment is hiding one's vulnerability, avoiding emotion, as displayed in the first half of Morning Song, while disassociation is the most vulnerable one can be, as demonstrated in Sheep and Fog. The former shows a vulnerability that most crave, the kind that is safe as that of a mother and child. Yet in the latter, the vulnerability is that of someone near the edge of a cliff. The speaker is disassociated out of disillusionment, out of abandonment, and does not see a way out. Any negative or numb feelings in relation to motherhood are often penalized by society. I need a sip, man. This is a long ass essay. Why? I didn't have the time to write all this in my actual exam, but I'm very proud of myself for this essay. Any negative or numb feelings in relation to motherhood are often penalized by society, while the negative emotions one may feel further into it are discouraged even more. Plath's poetry reads like a journal. Chronologically, Morning Song was penned shortly after the birth of her daughter Frida, and Sheep and Fog was finished a month before her passing. Despite their differences, both the poems carry a confessional tone. They serve as windows into the psyche of a woman in two incredibly vulnerable stages in her life. This is displayed through the disconnected and almost random nature of lines and phrases in the poems. In the former, there is very little structure, but structure nonetheless, while the arguably more vulnerable poem is entirely fragmented. Its internal thread like narrative perpetuates this. Plath truly is the master of portrayal of the female psyche and its complexity. She utilizes her toolbox of poetic techniques like no other when it comes to articulating her internal experiences. She is considered the patron saint of young women everywhere for this reason. Ariel, as a collection, allows us to peek into the most emotionally complicated time in her life as a young mother and an experienced writer. Her feminine perspective is an integral part of all her work. She is able to show the way young women perceive the world around them to a larger audience. Her portrayal of depression in Sheep and Fog is universal to women, who often feel a strong sense of isolation and hopelessness, which is also what what they may associate with motherhood. Like in this sense, again, side note, I know that I do. Like I am genuinely terrified of motherhood, and I feel like we observe as our, especially in most Asian societies now, which Asian societies are still quite reminiscent of society in the 60s, for as the way Plath might have observed it, right? um, and I feel like we notice our elders and we understand the women who've come before us and we understand the sacrifices they've made. And there is just this very deep pain that I think everyone carries, at least most women carry. And I know far too many women who are terrified of motherhood, and me included. And despite me being a teenager, and again, most people I know are still very young, the whole the sense of isolation and hopelessness is what a lot of people associate with motherhood. Now, Morning Song depicts how mothers often feel postpartum, something that is often shamed in society. Plath's works have served as comfort, inspiration, and unity in women in most places. So that is sort of my thing. I don't really like the ending of it. I feel like I could have ended it better, and I keep noticing a lot of flaws. But and I obviously got feedback from my teacher, but I'm quite proud of this essay. And extrapolating on this conversation, I just think that as women, these sort of, this deep pain is something that is very shamed. I feel like a lot of people expect women to just carry it in themselves, because I think in, historically, we've seen a lot of women just sort of hold it. It's become like a status symbol. It's become a sign of your worth or your skill or something, where, oh, I can handle all of this pain, I can handle all of this sacrifice I've made. I have made so much sacrifice, which I feel like we hardly talk about when in relation to men. I'm sure men have sacrificed, but men aren't driven to sacrifice. Men aren't expected to automatically sacrifice things just because they are men, you know so in that way, I think that the the topics that Plath covers in a lot of her poetry, in a lot of her works, it is so integral to womanhood. Like some of it is very, you're like, oh wow, this is a white woman. Like she's using all this racial imagery to describe her pain. But in some other poems, you do understand where she's coming from. And at least for people who have like clinical depression, I think it's very, I deeply understand her in that sense, because the depression isn't coming from any rational place. Like Plath was always depressed, and she went through really bad things in her life, right? Ted Hughes sucks, we hate Ted Hughes. But she still had depression before that. She attempted suicide when she was 10, right? And that is not anyone's fault or whatever it may be. So I find a very deep comfort in Plath's work, despite it being very disturbing. Um, and despite everything, I would always encourage people to read her work, even if you're only reading the bell jar. Like, sure, you should read the bell jar, or for somebody who may not be as sad but is angry at societal structures, I would always recommend The Applicant, right? So I feel like Plath's works are always, they speak very deeply of society, and some works that are still a little tone deaf, they still speak deeply to how women feel today, even women, privileged women, feel today. So that is the end of my video. It's 15 minutes, which is quite a lot for my video. I don't think I've ever made a video this long. But thank you for listening. nobody's stayed till here for sure. Chalo, bye. Bye.